So, Khilesh, tell us your impressions of the conference that just ended.
How I would look at when I reflect back quickly is, I think, a good opportunity for people from across sectors to meet each other. I think that's an important, I would say, even a beginning to an extent by my experience, because many a times we end up coming into conferences and meetings where people from the same sector are there, which has its own utility. But I think here people from different sectors were there, which I think was good because there were also a lot of differences, which is good to come on the table.
As I saw it, banging heads together so
Yes,
that we come up with something useful.
absolutely.
Yes,
Yes.
but what were the points of divergence? There were a few.
Yeah.
How do we work on those?
I think economics was surely one. I mean, what struck me was this discussion about being able to price everything and certain aspects of our life or society being invaluable, which you can value but you cannot price. Nevertheless, I think today the minister from Pakistan, I think he made a very good point also about being able to still, because policymakers listen to when we are able to convert realities into costs basically in the pricing. So I'm in two minds right now, honestly. But I think that is a good point of discussion, and that is an important point to be taken forward, I think, in the times to come also.
What else did we disagree on?
I think some certain smaller issues I would say, but maybe because we personally, I mean, one of the impressions I have is that we are a lot of practitioners here. And as one of our participants said, that we are not so many of us academicians, so the academic rigor is a question. We speak a lot from our own limited practice experiences, which need not be the end all. So, I mean, in one instance, for example, when we were discussing about for the role of information and the people who are in the business of providing information, they feel one way, that they're equipped, they're ready, they're prepared, they have the access to infrastructure, whereas the others who are thinking about the people at the bottommost levels of poverty and deprivation, they have a reflection and an experience that perhaps that infrastructure or even that capacity is not yet there. So those were some of the other points of disagreements. I think the information group also provided some concrete data, which I do think works. I think it makes the arguments very clinching many a times. So I think that was it. Another thing that it comes to mind, I don't know whether it's a disagreement or not, but the micro and macro kind of divide or a perspective. I'm experiencing this more and more in the last 2 or 3 years. Every time a good case study comes from the field, I think first we should acknowledge the people who've done good work in the field. We shouldn't kind of denounce them or decry their work or minimize their work by saying that what implications it has on policy. And not only implications, I mean, have you been able to influence policy? Maybe it's not their role necessarily to influence policy. Maybe it's the role of others and everybody needs to work in synergy. But every time in conferences nowadays, I sometimes find even a level of cynicism when a good case study is presented on solid groundwork. So while at one level we respect that empirical evidence and we say that empirical evidence is required to be able to influence policy. On the other hand, immediately such case studies are followed by questions of, oh yeah, that's fine, but how does it influence the policy? Maybe it doesn't do it today, but hopefully we need it, more and more of such examples to be able to influence policy in the future. That is another thought that I had maybe.
What about the science and policy gap that we often talked about? How do we bridge that one?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I think for me, honestly, it was a good learning. Today, I think the session that we had in the morning with the three persons from with the policy experience, I think they said it very clearly that in our part of the world, the impression I got was that, although not because I'm an Indian, but I think the impression I got was that perhaps the people from India said that they have more backing of science as compared to perhaps our, the deputy secretary from Bangladesh, who in a very candid way said that maybe that access is not available right now. There is a huge gap. Of course, that was also seconded by our colleague from India, who also said that currently the language that scientists speak is not necessarily fathomed or understood easily by the policymakers, and that has to be bridged. Plus the credibility of science itself, I mean, is it done with a vested interest? Then there's a big question mark on that science. And perhaps those people backed with a lot of money are more able to access policymakers. I mean, this is my view about, again, coming from a civil society perspective. That's a fear I have, that, the science which really is pro-poor, whether that even has access to policymakers is a question. I mean, it's a whole lot of mixed feelings and impressions, because I don't think there's anything very cut and dried and black or white. It's a lot of gray, I think. Also, there is this feeling that there are more and more instances where what one of our colleagues spoke about, where in India, for example, a lot of civil society work backed by scientific evidence has been able to influence policy as well. So it's a mix, basically, of science policy divide. Maybe we've reached somewhere, but not definitely the last mile yet. not whole of it.
So what happens next? Do these strands go their own separate ways, or how do we weave them together
No,
for livelihood?
I think the organizers themselves, in whatever discussions I've had, being the moderator, being on the sidelines, I've heard their plans, and I think they have been speaking about facts that they would like to keep the discussion rolling. I think to an extent which is fair, I think they're leaving it also on the participants to see whether they click together or not, because it should not be driven, it should not be externally funded entirely all the time. Like for example, just to give you a small instance, yesterday when we were looking for volunteers to draft the declaration, as a moderator I insisted that there will be 3 volunteers coming without any incentives, etc. And I think we need to wait for such processes as well. We need to wait and see whether people really, if the listserv that gets established or the e-group that gets established, whether people also take the initiative. So it should be a voluntary initiative, collective initiative of everybody, of course facilitated by particularly the organizers who set the ball rolling, I would say. And I do believe that there are thoughts of this happening and this continuing. I'm not sure about very concrete things except the listserv and the e-group that is being spoken about, but I guess that intent is there very much.
So watch this space.
Yeah,
Okay.
surely.
Thank you.